Eric. Eric is giving us the thumbs up, which means we are here live on. I suppose we're live and produced like a Pro Academy. And Kat was asking, yes, this is Academy only. This is not a. This is not a public one. We did that already. We did Let It Be on Monday, which was rather fun. It's interesting, Jerry, isn't it? It's like about half the comments were just talking about Let It Be naked.
Yeah, a lot of people just love that version of it. You know, it's made up of some different tracks or cuts even. I think one of the respondents there on the broadcast was talking about The Long and Winding Road, and I believe that's a completely other version of the song that's on Let It Be Naked. But some people like that rawness of it. Equally, you know, they'll like the rawness of, I think, Double Fantasy has a naked version too, and some people prefer that to the fully produced version by Jack Douglas. But I like Jack's version, and frankly, I like Spector's version of Let It Be. So,
well, just for a quick clarity, Jack did the stripped down version, the raw one. He did both. Okay. Yeah, him and Jay Messina did it, and we're actually interviewing them. We need to schedule that later on this week.
So clearly the extent
about
of my
the Double Fantasy one. So interestingly enough.
Yeah, the extent of my knowledge clearly ends at the end of the proper Beatles catalog.
No, it's okay,
guys.
No, you're talking about one of my best friends. I mean, there's some equipment in the studio that belongs to him. You know what I mean? It's no, Jack and I are very close, and we're texting all the time. But no, so yeah. It's that there's so much. I mean, I don't know, is there any one single person that would know all about the Beatles and all of their solo careers? Yeah,
maybe Mark Lewison, maybe.
Yeah, his book's pretty amazing.
Oh yeah, good guy too, good guy.
So Chris is saying I look dapper in the jacket. Well, I was just saying, you know, I've actually been here for a couple of hours because I had a 9:30 call. With I'm a associate professor at Artes in the Netherlands, so I teach students there. So I did a 2-hour call there before this, but yeah, this is my jacket. It's like, you know, when it's cold. I know it's hilarious, isn't it? In Los Angeles, it's cold.
Yeah. Just for context, the wind chill here this morning was minus 16 degrees centigrade.
I'm not sure if California's... Sorry, I don't know if Southern California's ever had a minus anything.
Well...
It gets to like 50 degrees here in an evening, and everybody's like, oh, it's so cold today. And I'm just like... I've been here... Yeah.
Balmy.
Yeah, so... This is good. What I like about these is it's a lot more informal, as you can tell, because we didn't start off with like, "Hello, Jerry, we're going to be talking." It's a lot more informal. It's all Academy members. We're all friends here. Tom wants to know whereabouts you are, Jerry.
I'm in Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
But he's not actually originally Canadian. Oh,
no. I came by my Canadianness the hard way.
The hard way. Is that what you tell your wife?
No, just don't let her watch these broadcasts. That usually works. Originally from Seattle, Washington, and I've been here almost a decade now. And Canadian citizen now, but I love living in Toronto. It's a great, great city.
Marvelous. Frank says, do I have an alarm set for 4 a.m.? No, I don't need it because I have kids. I have kids and a puppy. I don't remember the last time I quote unquote slept in. Like if I get up at 8 a.m. some mornings, like on the weekends, I'm like, oh, what a great lie-in I had today. It's only 8 a.m. You know.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's when you have kids, there's no such thing. Especially my daughter, who's just she's a ball of energy, amazing, absolutely amazing. She's like up and at 'em. Where that's not my natural state as a musician. Tom says sleep is overrated. So what we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen, is we're going to respect the process, and the process is we asked for questions in advance. So we have 7 questions that were already put up in the forum by people that weren't able to attend. So we'll do those. We don't have a time limit on this. It's really up to Jerry and whether we just whether I bore him to tears.
You'll see my energy wane, but it takes quite a while. So I'm happy to answer whatever questions come about.
Well, we interviewed Bill Schnee, who is, I think he's late 70s, isn't he? And we had like a half an hour phone conversation beforehand, and he said to me, he goes, I'm getting a little older now. I don't have that amount of energy, and I think the interview went on for 3 hours. Hugh Padgham, 2 3-hour interviews, and we only did the first 10 years of his career in 6 hours.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
There's just some guys like Bill and Hugh that just have resumes like, oh yeah, I won like 8 Grammys, and I did. You're like, okay.
Yeah, they got a lot of life to share. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm really trying to get Bob Ezrin at the moment.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I'm only going to say that inside the Academy. We have a lot of mutual friends, Jack being one of them, and of course, the Wall is right up there with my. It's hard to come up with the top 5 because I say you always hear me say my top 5 albums. I do think Let It Be, talking Beatles, is in my top 5 records. Do I think it's one of their top 5 albums? Maybe not. Maybe Revolver is the number 1, probably Abbey Road, then probably Sgt. Pepper's. I think that's probably a relatively accepted top 3. But for me as a fan, I love Let It Be. I just love everything about that record.
Did you get through the film?
I did.
Yeah,
absolutely amazing.
Nice, huh?
Are we allowed to talk about that sort of publicly? That you have a copy of the film that you gave me? Oops, too late.
I didn't hear the question, Warren. Sorry.
Yeah. What? I'm sure lots of people watching here also have that. All right. So wait there. So the recording in elastic time, is that a Beatles related question? Have a look. I'm clicking on the questions here. And it is running slower than a slow thing on National Slow Day. Wow. God bless the interwebs. It's probably because we have lots of streaming going on.
Sucking up a lot of bandwidth there in that beautiful studio.
Yeah, we had a great session last night. Eric did a session with Cameron Webb. Cameron, because one of our neighbors happens to be a singer in this band called Blink something.
Blink and a couple of numbers.
Blink and 3 numbers. Anyway, so he just lives down the street, and so Cameron did some recording with him last night, and he called me during the day and said, "Can I borrow your studio for tonight?" And I was like, "Yep, you can borrow the studio and Eric." So that was fun. And it went well, Eric?
Very well.
Very well. Look at that. All right, I don't know why the interwebs is. I can't open up this question. I'm trying to.
This is where Eric is like the sidekick, would normally chime in and ask the question.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not opening any of these.
That's the typical tag team thing.
Are you getting the same problem?
So far, no. I'm going through. I'm going to the forum right now, and it's slowing down.
It's slowing down. There's too much action going on here. Well, in that case, because it's Academy only, while we try and get, because we're having some issues here. The new film? No, not the new film. The original film. The original film.
Yeah, not the Peter Jackson film, folks. I don't know that anyone but insiders have seen that. Yeah, we're talking about the Michael Lindsay Hogg film.
Nate says, Volume 4 is great. Didn't know that Lennon played trumpet on Helter Skelter? Nor did I. Was that Lennon playing on it?
I don't think I said that, but I wouldn't put it beyond me. Helter Skelter, he might have. Let's see. Just a second here, guys. Since we're in the Academy, I can actually look for stuff in my own books.
Look for it in your own book, yeah. Yep.
And here
Do
we
this.
go. Let's see. It could very well be. Yeah, there were some late overdubs. Let me find that now. Let's find. Actually, it's Mal Evans that was honking on the trumpet, not John Lennon.
Oh, Mal Evans. That makes sense. Yeah. And Mal does the count, doesn't he? In Day in the Life.
Day in the Life. Yeah, he's the one counting up to 24, counting each bar.
Wow, I'm trying to get these questions open.
Yeah, if it wasn't McCartney typically who would grab a trumpet, it was gonna be a session musician. McCartney liked to grab a trumpet every now and then, but Lennon. It's probably actually there's some pictures of him with a trumpet during Magical Mystery Tour, I think, with the All You Need Is Love sessions where they're goofing around, but I don't know that he ever tracked a trumpet.
Right. Well, God bless him. Is there any other questions here from the Academy members while we're trying to open up this this other page here? Eric is a great engineer, by the way. Jens is saying, oh, okay. Now, Eric is a fantastic engineer. Aren't you, Eric?
I try.
He says, I try. Pete says, Mal's the one that finally helps John turn Ringo's drum riser at the Washington Coliseum gig.
Yeah. Another. I've got this massive collection of pretty much everything ever filmed that Beatles were ever filmed on, documentary-wise or television-wise. It's called, I think, Siedelman's Chronology, and it is 7 volumes. Each volume is 7 hours, and they have that entire Washington D.C. Show in it. It's good. It's a good show. But yeah, they do they turn the riser so they face one part of the audience, and then for a couple songs, and they'll flip around and face another part of the audience for a few songs. Kind of funny, very primitive stage setup, but a lot of great energy in that. And sometimes the microphones weren't working, just crazy.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how primitive those PA systems would have been in those days. Just.
Well, in a lot of cases, they were using the house PA, right? They weren't, they didn't necessarily bring, they weren't backing up there with a transport truck to haul in their own sound reinforcement. They brought their amps, but yeah, in a lot of cases, they were using the house PA. So yeah, imagine that. Ugh.
I can't imagine. I this time last year, in December last year, I was in Indiana, in Fort Wayne, and we went to an arena there, and we were, working on the sound system there. So I've been to arenas, and we pulled the sound system apart. I brought in Matt Butcher, of course, who one of my oldest friends in the world, who's the Gorillaz front of house and Blur and a whole bunch of other stuff. And we played music through it, and it is, those are dreadful. Those kind of arenas sound absolutely dreadful. And we were going in there to advise and improve, and I have some software we've been developing and all that kind of fun stuff. You know me, I'm always only doing 150,000 things at once. And it's quite remarkable how bad PA systems are in those kind of environments. Oy, oy, oy.
Yeah, and on the flip side, it's amazing to me the degree that live sound companies have improved their game. The last handful of big shows that I went to before everything shut down sounded so good.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of the German company. Was it DMB? Do everybody know that? Their front of house stuff, freaking believable. Unbelievable.
this was a few years ago, but I was back in Seattle, and I went to an amphitheater show for Radiohead when they were on their In Rainbows tour. And talk about a horrible environment for sound, and yet it was pristine. It was gorgeous. It was just the best sounding thing, just the best sounding, every frequency articulated, and no timing issues or anything. It was just remarkable. And yeah, what an advancement from the early concerts that I'm sure you went to too, with just a wall of speakers facing you, and whatever you got, you got.
Yeah, no, totally. I just put the link to it. It's called DB Audio, DNB. Yeah, you have to go. Kat said it's been a long time since you went to a concert that sounded amazing. I think it's definitely the artist, the band, and the mixer. The thing about the Gorillaz is and Blur is that Matt's been with those bands since the beginning, and he's also a freaking borderline genius. And he gets the gear and then he tunes it. He also is completely digital now, has been digital for several years. So what he'll do is he'll record shows, record sound checks. He goes back to the hotel rooms and mixes them. So the next show he's mixed, if he's doing like 2 nights in a row, he'll go back and remix it, and it's fully automated. And then you watch him work, and he's got all of the stuff that he learned from the night before, plus he's also live mixing at the same time. And yeah. It's, you have to have people that give a crap, like anything. You can give as we all know, you can give anybody the best gear in the world, but without, well, and
there's so much preparation for that too. All of the rehearsal time, that they spend building scenes for the mixing console and all of that. There's so much preparation for a great live show. But when you've been to one, you know it.
Oh yeah, I mean, even like what is it called, Outdoors Lands or whatever it's called in San Francisco, when the Gorillaz played there, it was the best outdoor sound I've ever heard in my entire life. Yeah. But again, talking about guys that are obsessed with sound. Yeah. Not everybody is. Anyway, so that. So, any Beatle-related questions? Did Paul, George, and John pick instruments in the studio for the song, or was that, or what was comfortable for them from 66 to 70? I'm not sure what you mean, Anthony. Did Paul, George, and John pick instruments in the studio for the song, or what was comfortable for them 66 to 70? Oh, you mean like, John likes to play acoustic, so he's decided to put acoustic down, or... Yeah, I mean, I think I know what the question is there.
I mean, like any other, recording artist working with a producer, you're going to have your track, and you're going to have a vision of what you want that song to be, and that will be the first level of speaking to what the instrumentation is, and then it's going to come down to the tones that you want to bring out. So. As they entered their middle years, they had a range of instruments available to them to choose from the acoustic side to like electric guitars and keyboards and things like that. So now it becomes, after you've decided the overall feel of it, is you start dialing in closer and closer to what you want, and certainly it's what you want out of the back end of the song that's going to dictate the choices, and they were no different than anybody else. So they might, Harrison might have started a song in 66 on one of his, on like his Gretsch Tennessean or something like that, but quickly discovered that that's not quite working, and now he has a Stratocaster available to him and gives that a shot. They're to that end, the Beatles they're recording artists. They're doing what every artist does. Have a vision in your head, and then try to fulfill it with the tools that are at hand. And they had a pretty good range of instruments by the mid 60s to choose from.
Yeah, that makes absolutely perfect sense. But yeah, it is interesting because with bands, like, I think one of the many reasons producers, engineers, and mixers are fascinated with the Beatles, and also I think obviously the Beach Boys, although they didn't have as high an output, but was because all of the groundbreaking production that was happening was coming from those two artists. Now, don't get me wrong, plenty of other artists were doing interesting stuff, but not to the commercial success of them. And yeah, I like these questions because I realize, they were inventing everything. Everything was being invented. It was like the first to do this or yeah, especially for Britain, where I grew up, where everybody was lab coats and, dressed a little bit like I am at the moment, probably. And, pencils here and maybe a little pair of clippers, scissors there, it's...
Yeah, the Beatles pushed the boundaries in the studio at EMI. They made a lot of people nervous. They broke gear. They were successful enough to get away with it, and that's part of it. And then they were brave enough to ask for it and not to. Actually, this is one of the areas I think where Lennon was such a huge benefit to the band. Is Lennon has never been known as a highly technical guy. He just knew what he wanted to hear, even though he couldn't necessarily describe that in musical terms. He could describe it more in literary terms, typically, than musical terms. People familiar with some of the history of the Beatles will remember that during Sgt. Pepper, he's asking for his voice to sound like a llama, or maybe that's Revolver. Is that Tomorrow Never Knows? He's asking for his vocal to sound like he's the Dalai Lama, on top of a mountain. So that's the marching order he gives to Jeff Emmerich as an engineer. Well, Emmerich solves that then by routing his voice through a Leslie cabinet. These are things that no one had been asking engineers. Usually in the hierarchy of a studio in that era, sometimes the band would never even see the producer. And in Studio 2, that's at EMI, that's not that difficult to imagine because the studio is upstairs half a flight from the Studio 4, the control room is half a flight up the stairs. So sometimes the band would come in and, this disembodied voice would tell them, okay, gentlemen, play your track and do a good job. And when they're done, it's, exits over there on the right. Thank you for your time.
I thought it was exit stage left.
That could very well be. So
you should know that you're in Canada.
The Beatles were asking things of the studio, of the engineers, of the technical department that no one had, and it got everyone going creatively, from Ken Townsend in the amp room out to Emmerich and Martin, trying to keep up with their vision. And and in all fairness, in Martin's vision too, which it was a shared trip.
Absolutely amazing. Let me see. The questions are coming in. The guitar sounds on Birthday is so good. Do you know what guitars, amps, mics were used? I mean, the middle section when they rock out right before Yes, We're Going to Have a Party is awesome. Yeah, there's some great guitar sounds on that.
Yeah, in that era in 1968, they're over to the Fender amplifiers. So they're using the twin reverbs. Yeah, that's the kind of the amplifier of choice for them at this point, is they've moved away from the Voxes pretty completely, and now they're onto the Fenders. And I'm thinking they're blackface Fenders at this point, not silverface that they picked up in '69. And then the guitar selections they've got going on, probably the big difference you're hearing in that is Harrison really leaning on the SG for a lot of the work. That guitar has a really great cutting quality to it. Lennon's guitar, go-to guitar, almost from when he brought it on into his playing, was his Epiphone Casino. But he was also still using a Stratocaster. He had a Stratocaster he picked up in the Help era that he was still playing during this time too. So if you think of a combination of Strats and SG, That's probably what we've got going on the guitar side. And then amplification, we got Fenders.
Marvelous. Hey! So apparently it wasn't just a problem with the site, it was a problem with our IP address that got blocked.
Yeah.
Maybe Eric, was trying to download too many I don't want to know what you were doing, Eric.
Multi-tracks, stems.
Whatever was going on, whatever weird stuff Eric was doing, the IP got blocked to produce like a pro.
It might not have been Eric. It might have been those Blink with 3 numbers that were visiting
the Blink
the
people.
studio.
Oh,
The Blink people. What were they doing last night, Eric? Those Blink people. Blinkety
were
blank.
blinking.
So
Yeah.
Glenn Dibble says the Beatles were such well rehearsed and tight that some of the songs were not strictly at a certain tempo, say 120. Love Me Do had significant fluctuation in tempo. Any suggestions on how to record without a click track?
The simplest one that I can give you is practice. That's really it. And that's what the Beatles did. They just play these tracks over and over again. And when you do that, you find a tempo that's comfortable for you, and you're pretty much going to be in the pocket of that every time that you pick it up to play again. Any of you that have played in a more kind of traditional live situation will understand that you rehearse songs over and over again to get ready to go on stage. And if you're not working with a click because you're trying to tie into some programmed material and you are just playing live, you snap into a groove for every song that you play, and that's the way it's done, really. Now, if you got a great timekeeper like Ringo, you don't really need a click track. Of course, there's a natural variation in the tempo by a handful of beats per minute. Someone came up to me at one point and was talking about one of these early Beatles tracks and said, that's got to be an edit because the beats per minute dropped from 79 to 82 or changed from 79 to 82, increase. And I said, oh, interesting. I'm pretty sure it's not, but let me look at it. And I look at it and I realized that he's correct. The time moves a little bit, but it's over the course of 12 seconds in a 3-minute song. Right?
That's not unusual.
Yeah, it's not unusual at all for just a natural organic performance. But the way that the Beatles got there and the way that most bands get there is simply by having that material so internalized that every time you play it, you're going to be within a couple BPM of your target.
Yep. No, that makes perfect sense, and it mirrors my own personal experience, to be honest, of first-time tracking, on tape. Like most, I think the first half of my career was entirely on tape. Well, that's not entirely true. Maybe the first third was entirely on career. Then the second third was tape transferring and using digital, running the two together. And then the last third has been almost entirely digital, although we still do the occasional thing on tape. So, yeah, there wasn't... We only used to do songs on click that we felt like needed to be on click. You know what I mean? It's weird, isn't it? You didn't think that's sort of way, because you knew when you were playing, a track live, and then you put it on click, the quote unquote average tempo, everything seemed to get boring.
Yeah, there's something to be said, especially if it's a band tracking live. Mm-hmm. You can't. That conversation is something you don't want to disrupt. You don't want to disrupt the natural interplay between musicians by imposing something artificial on them if it's not necessary. So if the band's of a caliber that they can play tightly together and they move together, then that's the spirit of the song. And in my opinion, you want to capture those things. There's certainly types of music that are programmatic and you want to have locked down and quantized and tight in that way. But when you got a band working together, that ebb and flow, much like an orchestra, that's just part of the game and it's part of the sound. And you don't want to lose it for the sake of being able to throw this up in a Pro Tools session or whatever, and show that it maps correctly.
Right.
So,
no, I agree 100%. So Pete Sawchuk, who is here, I believe, asked, was there a pretty typical drum mic setup used at whatever points on Ringo's kit? Similarly, were there any typical mics used?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So early on, there were only 2 microphones that were used, and we're talking through 1966, pre-Revolver. They were only ever using, commonly, an AKG D19C as an overhead, and that was basically in the middle of the kit. And then they would varied. They would either use an STC 4038, they would use an AKG D12. After that, after they blew up enough ribbons, they went to a D12 as the kick drum mic, and it was placed at about the kick drum mic was about a foot off of the front head and at around between the 12 and the 1 o'clock position, and kind of up high, not in the center of the drum where the beater would be nailing it, but up high a little bit. So that was the setup for a long, long time. Now, when Emmerich got there, they started adding a lot more microphones eventually, and they were still using pretty much the D19Cs, AKG D19Cs were everywhere. For over tom or under tom in some cases with Emmerich, over snare, and then they started using a KM56 and Neumann KM56 as an under snare microphone. At around 66, 67, that started to come into play, and then in front of the kick drum, still the AKG D12 or a D20 was being used there. So
I just have to interject. Jens Nelson, why did you delete that?
Oh, sorry. No, that was a mistake.
Eric just unfortunately deleted Jens for absolutely no reason.
Oh, Jens, cancel culture has caught up with you.
Yeah, what's going on? I don't know why you deleted that.
Oh, wait, there we go.
Did you put it back again?
I think we can see it. Can you see it?
You can put it back again. Anyway, Jens said, by the way, great microphone sound on... great microphone sound on Jerry today. And then Cry90 said, +10 was the immediate thing.
Yeah, there's a backstory here, fellows, that
there's a bit
we
of a
won't get
backstory.
into.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Thank you for that. And
I don't know why. I'm glad
I passed the audition.
Jens, I don't know why Eric deleted your comment. It was a nice compliment for Jerry, and Eric's like, I don't want Jerry to get any compliments. I'm going to delete the compliment from Jens.
Don't let him know.
Yeah, don't compliment him.
So back to drums now. So there's the mid period. Now in the late period, and what we add to this is sometimes the kick drum was recorded with 2 microphones, one still being a D20 and the other being this Sony C38A, which is a very weird dynamic mic. And when Glenn Johns is working on the sessions, now he's bringing U67s in everywhere. U67 becomes the overhead, and he starts to bring in his kind of classic Glenn Johns miking techniques to it, and that's happening during the Let It Be period. We go back to Abbey Road. Emmerich's back in charge, and the U67s kind of go back into the cupboard in favor of the tried and true sound of those D19Cs. And that walks you through, I hope, the way that the drums are allocated.
See, the way I hear this about everybody else is like they started off with like inexpensive D19s, whatever, and then ended up just throwing a bunch of money at it when Glenn Johns came in. That's what I heard. But is that what everybody else heard? Start off D19, end up lots of U67s, which, to be honest, all makes perfect sense to me. I mean, if I had only... When I asked Hugh Padgham this question, I've told Academy members this in the interview I did with him. I said to him, what's your Desert Island microphone? And he said U87. He's like, I can make a record with any record with a U87. And he said actually most of the records he made were just a U87. Now, obviously, the 67 is kind of, everything we love about 87, but with a little extra sparkle from the valves, the tubes, the valves. So the answer is just throw lots of money at it. No, I'm just joking. Sort of.
Well, Glenn Johns used U67s on everything when it came to Let It Be. Pretty much everything. If you look at the rooftop concert, you'll any pictures from it. I know most people watching here can't get their hands on the film yet, or the older film, and haven't seen the new one yet. But look at pictures of the like the rooftop, or any of the pictures that were taken at Apple Studios, and you will see U67s everywhere, on everything. And that was just the way he did business. So
CT Maxwell is asking, and it's probably to do with the Waves release, how important do you think the RS-124 compressor is?
It's fundamental. It's fundamental to their sound from the start through the end. That compressor in Norman Smith's day, he was their first balance engineer, was used on the main output for the band to start. So when they were recording with limited tracks, 2-track, 4-track, their inputs would come in, and then on their way out onto when they're getting combined now to go out to tape, there was an RS-124 in between it. Either RS-124 or a Fairchild 660 was in between it, and the RS-124 was the choice of Norman Smith. So those early recordings up through the Emmerich takeover with Revolver, pretty much the band sound that you're hearing is being processed through an RS-124. After Emmerich came in, Emmerich preferred the Fairchild 660 to do that heavy lifting for the overall glue that the band would get on 1 or 2 tracks. The RS-124s were used in reduction remixes, so whenever they were bouncing down, that was also going to be in the chain to help normalize the signals. It's fundamental. It's the sound of McCartney's bass. It's the sound of Starr's drums. Now, step away from that. Surprisingly, the Fairchild limiter, the 660 limiter, is actually the sound of the vocals for the Beatles. That was the preferred.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that was the preferred tool for working with vocals. And I'm so glad Waves came out with that. Thank you, Waves, for filling that gap in the processing chain of the Abbey Road tools.
Yeah, it's taken some time, but I know there was originally some of the Abbey Road stuff that was done, and they removed that from the collection. So a couple of people were pointing that out. But I do know
Soft Tube, I think, initially did a plug-in version of the RS-124.
Yeah, they did it with Abbey Road, but I think Abbey Road's deal with Waves. I love Soft Tube stuff, don't get me wrong, but I think Abbey Road deals with Waves is pretty intense. I mean, now they have oh my God, I'm blanking on his name. I can see his face. I'm sorry. Is it Milak? He's got a Polish family, but he grew up in England, and his last name is Styles, and he's running the whole department completely. There's a whole department just on the modeling of the Abbey Road stuff. So they take it seriously. There's only a few holes left in their processing chain, their early processing chain. Someone asked, I don't know where this question came up. It might have come up across Facebook or something like that. But Mirek Styles.
So a couple more pieces that they might come up with or come in with would be, there was a Neumann mic equalizer that they had that might come in. boy, they had a handful of plug-in EQ boxes. Those might come in, but what's out there right now? Oh, they might model. Yeah, no. Sorry, I'm trying to think of their Reds modeled great already. Yeah, they've already got the curve bender. We've got access through waves and many other places to Fairchild's. Now they've got the Altec compressor.
Have Waze done an Abbey Road Fairchild? Or is
they haven't done their Fairchild.
They should do. Because there's nothing wrong with the Waze Fairchild. I'll just leave it at that. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's not the best Fairchild emulation. It's just, when did they do it? 20 years ago? 15 years ago? At least
quite a while ago.
Probably 20 years ago.
And there's other ones available, like from Universal Audio has their take on it. So,
which I'm sure is phenomenal.
Yes. Yeah, there are choices out there, but and I guess the other thing with this for people to keep in mind is that there were so few of these built, so few of those 660s built in total, and they've been around forever, and every studio did what they needed to do to keep them running. There's never going to be any Fairchild that sounds like another Fairchild. So does that sound like a Fairchild? All you could say is it sounds like that Fairchild.
Yeah, yeah,
but not a Fairchild.
Yes, that was the question that came up. I have an Altec, which Steve Anderson, God rest his soul, who was a local tech here, modded to not the same specs, but close to the same specs as the Abbey Road one. It's got it's actually got a variable attack and release in it, a threshold control, which the original never had. But it was modded to be like that, and it sounds phenomenal, and I love it. I was always told that Lennon liked that on his vocals, the RS-124. Is that wrong?
I don't think that's wrong. Just and what all I'm talking about is the general chain, like the go-to chain that they were utilizing. And in Smith's day, the 124 did most of the work, but the Fairchild took the vocals. And then almost the inverse with Emmerich when he came in. Maybe that's part of a little bit of the differentiation in their sound is that swap of application of these compressors and limiters.
Yeah, I hear you. There's some good questions coming in. I like Jens says regarding, and we have to give Jens special dispensation because Eric deleted him. So this one's especially for you, Jens, for the deletion, the attack on your pride from Eric. Anyway, so Jens says, regarding guitar sound, the guitar sounds in the medley on side 2 of Abbey Road are maybe the best in their whole career. Could you please tell us the equipment used?
Yeah, so we're back at Abbey Road, and again, we are guitar-wise. Harrison is using his Fender Gold Top Lucy. He's still using Rocky, the Stratocaster. He's still using his Epiphone Casino. Lennon's pretty much exclusively on the Casino. McCartney's got his Casino, so these are semi-hollow bodies for people that aren't aware. McCartney's also has, I think, an Esquire in play, a Fender Esquire in play. Amplification is almost exclusively Fender Silverface amplifiers. So that's the rig that's being used there. Exceptions, of course, are going to be Harrison is still hauling in his Leslie 147 for certain things, which was using a Leslie preamp as well. Yeah, that's the guitar tone. The guitar tone is Silverface amplifiers, and then a range of Gibson or Fender guitars, with the exception of the Epiphones.
Fantastic.
And these are getting recorded with U67s now at EMI. And also keep in mind that we're primarily using now a solid state board, the TG12345 board, which gives them a lot more control because every channel now has some ability to be processed with finer equalization, as well as there were Zener compressor limiters that were built into every channel of the board now. So a lot more fineness in the control of the sound was available to them.
Yeah, Mirek told me when because in Studio, which is the Revolver Studio, Studio 3?
3, yeah.
When I was in Studio 3 last year, they have one of the 2G boards in there. And of course, I took a photo with it, like you do. And Mirek was there,
yeah.
And I asked him, and I asked him about it, and he said, "Oh, the engineers hated this console. Why did they hate it?"
Well, it was, a lot of it is, think about if you've gone to work every day and you've mastered your craft on a certain tool set, and now management is asking you to replace your tool set, learn another one, and not only learn another one, but immediately be applying that knowledge to getting product out the door. I think it's as simple as that. Certainly there's a fineness of sound that came from that TG that was.
I mean, I love the sound, but Let It Be, the album was it entirely done on the older console with the V72s?
Yeah, it was recorded and mixed through Red Gear. So so for those of you that didn't check out the video that we did earlier, when they get to Apple Studios on Seville Row that are unfinished because Magic Alex doesn't know what he's doing, they do a test recording through his.
Pausing you a second, did any of the Magic Alex stuff make it? Anything?
No.
Nothing?
No. Nothing.
Not a single.
Nothing worked.
I mean,
that's as definitive as I can get. Nothing worked,
and no recordings were kept.
No, they did one quick test that was a static filled mess, and not usable in any way whatsoever. One test, and the Beatles left the studio. Martin gets on the phone then to EMI, and he secures for the band, for the purposes of the recording, a Red 37 console, a Red 51 console, and a 3M M23 8-track machine, along with Alltech 120 or the RS-124 modified Alltech compressors and Fairchild 660 limiters. So the core gear needed to do the work was all EMI gear. And then when it came to be mixed, it was either mixed at Olympic by the versions we haven't heard were primarily mixed at Olympic Sound Studios by Glenn Johns. So that would have been through Helios gear, and then when Spectre got his hands on it, he mixed it in a mix-only suite, Room 4 at EMI, and Room 4 was equipped with a Red consoles as well. So that's it's in that way it's a throwback, right? It isn't utilizing the TGs. It's being recorded in an outer building from the main studio using other gear, using these Dr. Dunton. Is that correct?
I don't know.
Monitors. So not the Alltechs, not the Tannoy Lockwoods, but a whole different monitor setup and everything. So very much a throwback in that sense.
Amazing. There's a good question here. It's from F. Nerva, and they say, what seemingly small details in the recording process have you found to be especially fascinating or inspiring? Good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I always what inspires me about the Beatles when I think about how they did the work was the work ethic. I guess is the first place I'll land with that question. These guys were prepared to make the records they made. They came into the studio well rehearsed to make the music. That's and now as they move later in their career, post Pepper. So Pepper is an outlier. In Pepper, they're going in and sometimes they really don't know what they're doing, but they're just trying to figure it out. But in general, the Beatles were a very rehearsed band, and they would work out a song by just playing it and playing it and playing it. So they had, run of the studio there at EMI at Abbey Road, so they could come in and do their rehearsals in the studio. But they weren't. It wasn't sitting around like, what are we going to do with this track? They were working together as a band to bring these songs to life and to rehearse them, to perfect them, and then record them. Now, not much of the rehearsal work has remained, but that was their process, and that aspect of it, is impressive to me. And it's impressive especially if you've been around enough bands that aren't rehearsed and aren't ready to come in and make the records that they want to make. Then you're like, shouldn't you learn the chord progression before we start tracking this? Now on the technical side, I'd say the things that were really impressive was how the engineers were able to work with the limited tools that they had. And now we're talking about the way that they used vari-speed, the way that they used tape reductions to gain more tracks, but to maintain quality. All of these, these are little things going on in the background that give us the songs that we love. But you never hear a compromise in the quality of the work that's being done, and so there are lots of little things in that aspect that are impressive to me. The edits that we don't even hear, they're so good. Like a lot of people might not know. Please Please Me, and this is off the top of my head. I'm not referring. I've got my notes here somewhere, but Please Please Me is the result of, I believe, an edit of 5 different mixes.
Wow.
And you hear that song, and I guarantee you don't hear.
I never knew that.
Those edits.
Never knew that.
Yeah, I mean that kind of stuff that that the engineering team's doing to give the Beatles the sound that they want.
So is our takeaway from F. Nerva's question that the sort of like anything goes, work hard at it? Is that sort of what it is? Because it sounds like you're saying they were always business. When they turned up to the studio, they were always working. It was not a case of like sitting around doing nothing. There was always something to do. And then whatever it took to make it great, they were willing to do.
Yeah, that's a great summary. That's a great summary of it. Always moving forward. And the other thing, and this is a kind of a classic approach to recording, is they were forced to make decisions and move forward, and that's never a bad thing, or rarely a bad thing. That you're making commitments to your sound and your vision for the song as you move forward. You're not looking back. And the Beatles were forced to do that, but that didn't deter them. To my mind, there's only one instance where I can think of that they truly looked back, and this was McCartney re-recording the lead vocal for Lady Madonna. He didn't like the original vocal for it, and so he re-records it. And then he doesn't like the re-recorded version of it, and he asks Emmerich to use the old one. Well, mercifully, it was on a reel that was pre-tape reduction, so they had that performance. But in a lot of cases, you don't have the performance anymore, or you can't access it in context of the song that you've built going forward. But there's one instance where that he had to fly the vocal track into the current state of the recording from another reel in order for Lady Madonna to sound like we hear it. So there's Emmerich giving the Beatles what they wanted, but typically they were always moving forward. So the hard work was always getting the song toward completion and having a song to deliver. Yeah, they didn't hang around on tunes very much, if at all.
Some great questions going down here with this discussion. People asking about 67 clones. My personal favorite, I put it in the chat, is the Peluso. I feel like the Peluso used 67. We've done a bunch of shootouts. However, it's a double-edged sword. That, I believe, is the best 67 clone out there, especially for the price. It's ridiculous. But the one that sounded honestly exactly like Clay Blair's 67s, I believe he has two, like, we could not tell the difference, and the differences were just like, oh, that sounds just as amazing but in a different way on this. And when you're dealing with vintage microphones, sometimes you get something that's just as good but slightly different, but then you've got 2 or 3 vintage to shoot out and they all sound different to each other. The best I've ever heard is the Townsend UAD. When you get the Townsend and you use the UAD emulations of the 67, it's on the Clay Blair Beatles course that we did, and you cannot tell which one's which. It's absolutely amazing.
I love that Townsend L22. I just love that microphone. It's such a cool microphone.
Yeah. It's interesting though, because the Slate one is definitely not as good. I don't even claim it to be. Generally speaking, it's not as good a quality microphone. It's not as well built. The Townsend's very overly engineered. When you pick it up, you're like, wow, this is an expensive microphone. You can tell they spent a lot of time and energy, and it took longer developing it. They started it a long time before the if you want to do it, yeah, totally. Thanks. Thank you. What was I saying? They spent a lot longer. They announced it before Slate even started building his. There's just a lot of love in it. But I will say, because I like balance in conversations, the Slate microphone for the C12 alone is worth buying. Because the C12 emulation on the Slate microphone sounds like a C12. And how much is a C12?
$18,000.
$18,000. So if you're going to spend $1,000 on the Slate one just to get the C12, it's worth it. Seriously, it's worth it. I'm not going to spend $18,000 on anything that isn't for my kids. You know what I mean? I'm long past spending $18,000. It's Peter Hook's about to auction some of his more of his equipment, and I'm really excited by it. And my friend Scott Marceau at Yamaha said, yeah. He's going to auction off his remaining BB1200Ss from back in the day. And I'm like, I'm not going to bid. I'm like, of course I want one, but auction? I'm not going to spend $15,000, $20,000. It just, as much as I'd love to, I got a family to feed.
Yeah. But there's another lesson. I think we could roll back another lesson from the Beatles was certainly nowadays we look at the microphone locker of Abbey Road and it's legendary, and they've got a huge collection of like the best mics in the world. But way back when, those AKG D19Cs are just AKG D19Cs. They're just a workhorse microphone that that was available and set up and good to go and covered a lot of things and could handle a lot of different inputs. And so it gets used. And so, they, like many of us, they're using the tools at hand. If you've got a great microphone, of course you want to use a great microphone. And they had the Neumanns, the U47, U40 and U48s. Of course you're going to use those where it makes sense, but in other cases, you're just using what you got and you're using what's available. And it's not necessarily the most expensive microphone all the time.
Yeah. Tons and tons of great questions here. I don't know where to start. Lots of questions about, do I like the Puig child? Yeah, I like all that stuff. But as I answered in the chat, I'm waiting for Abbey Road to do the Fairchild. When they do the emulation of the Fairchild, it's going to be phenomenal. And I'm going to buy it, and I'm going to talk about it, and I'm going to review it. Because It's what we want, you know what I mean? And as much as I love the UAD one, I live in Los Angeles. I've recorded at East West, Sunset Sound. I've recorded at Blackbird. I've used all the Fairchilds, but I've never used the Abbey Road one. That's the one.
Yeah, and then, the wonderful thing about those guys at Waves in that relationship is they take it so seriously. They do, they work their butts off to deliver those emulations. So people go like, well, how can you know? And how can you know that sounds like the RS-124? And I'm the first to put up my hand and say I've never used the RS-124, but I trust that those guys aren't going to let a product out the door that they don't believe is such a close analog of that device.
There's no other businesses I know that have a department that's just to do that.
Yeah.
There you go. Have people on staff just to make sure that these emulations are done right. I think that, and when I was at Abbey Road the last time, they're super protective of their legacy. They really believe strongly in it, and you don't get in and out of that building unless you are booked in. You go to the front desk and they're like, "What's your name?" And you're like, "This is my name." And they're like, "If you're not on the list, you're not coming in." It's they are very protective of their legacy. They understand their importance, and don't get me wrong, Sunset Sound's just as important. Many of these studios are.
Yep.
It's important. So I am definitely waiting for their Fairchild, and
I'm right with you. I'll be a first day buyer as I am with a lot of their stuff. It's for me it's kind of an essential toolkit to be able to have those things, because in some cases when questions have come up, those tools have helped me understand some things about, based just on the limitations of them, especially when you're talking about the red consoles and things like that. Understanding the limitations gives you a real appreciation of the music that got made. And it also, I think, gives you appreciation if you're working today of how few moving parts you need to get right to get a really good sound.
Totally.
Of course, they mastered these things. They knew how to work with them. They mastered them because they were running, 3 sessions a day, 5 or 6 days a week in those studios. So, taking the time with a simple tool to sculpt your audio, that's a big lesson I take away from the Beatles. It isn't all, and from EMI and Abbey Road and their early practices, is it doesn't take a huge tool set to do these things and make fantastic sounding music. It's just you have to really learn how to use it well, and take the time to do that and understand how you're applying it. Come on, Fairchild, bring on that Fairchild.
Yeah, no, I agree. So John Roseley has like a 3-part question here. Start with the first one. Part of it says, of all the various types of hardware used in recording the Beatles over the years, which ones, have you found the most difficult or nearly impossible to emulate in the box? I suppose we're sort of talking about that now. The question I think part. I'll answer this.
You answer. I have my opinion on that.
Yeah, I feel like one of the, I don't like the word problems in anything. One of the realities of thinking, whenever we use hardware or software, we have to remember, whether it's in digital or tape or whatever, we have to remember that the way people approach recording is more important than the gear. Because if the band, as Jerry was saying earlier about, are in a room rehearsing a song, somebody comes in, John or Paul comes in, or George comes in with a song they've written, they all sit down, they go over it. Maybe they've done a demo, so maybe they have some parts. Obviously, famously, the George Harrison demos, he's singing a bum, 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 bum. He's singing like string lines and melody lines. So he comes in and he plays the demo, they go out, they rehearse it. And they've got a limitation on tracks. So there is so many other things involved in it that the hardware is definitely very important in the process. I mean, very important. There's a certain sound to all of that. However, putting like a J37 plugin on every single track is a nice start. But when you can do 40 tracks, because the reality is that you might break down a single Beatles song near the end of their career, even on an 8-track, there might actually be like 20 actual tracks on there, but they've been bounced together. So it's not just how you use the hardware. You've got to think, well, if you want that sound, if you really wanted that, you'd have to think of the same methodology. Let's all track in a room. Let's have everybody bleed into each other somewhat. Then let's bounce those 4 or 5 different instruments, 3 instruments, say, that were recorded down to 1 track that we have on our 4-track. And then so there's a methodology. So I find like one of the problems when you're trying to emulate is the fact that we just think that if we use the hardware only, when really there's more to the magic. But I understand the question, and it's a good one.
Yeah, and that's completely correct. It's the music's always a sum of its parts. The music's always impacted by its time, that when it was created. It's always impacted by the limitations that are put on the artists and the engineers, and how they work within those limitations to deliver a product out the back end, to deliver music out the back end. It comes with art. It comes with every kind of art, and music is not an exception. So it isn't only having the tool set, but it is working with the tool set in the manner that the band worked with it. You can get kind of close if you want to go down that path with modern tools and with plugins. You can certainly give yourself this artificial limitation that I'm working on a 4-track, and whenever I fill that up, now I'm going to do a reduction. I'm going to do a reduction bounce, and now I'm going to work from that bounce. You can do these things if you want to. To the pure question of what's the hardest thing to emulate, I mean, clearly it's going to be the console. Consoles are complicated. And we can get so far, through waves, we've been able to get, channels. But there are, even in the red consoles, there were summing stages in them. There were reverb sends and things that were built into them that were utilized. And these were big valve based units that. Apparently, you can keep your breakfast warm on them. So you're running very hot, but because they had like most modern consoles, they had not only inputs, but they had an output group, and they had echo sends and returns. They had monitoring sends and returns, all those kinds of monitoring sends and that. All of those tools and the way that those can be used are different when you're talking about the totality of a console versus a channel that sounds like an input channel on the console. The inputs is a very important stage, obviously, but when it comes to consoles, I mean, like, why do we want the SSL bus compressor? Why does everyone want an SSL bus compressor? That's on the output side, and but it's the glue that comes out of that SSL that we're looking for, right? And that's at least currently is missing, and I can't imagine the complexity of emulate it. I hope I live to see the day, maybe I will, that we're able to have in our DAWs, we're able to actually work through a full console emulation, an emulation of a Trident A, an emulation of like a full console.
Yeah. I think you sort of can. I mean, you could build that
close,
because with the Brainworks, you can do. I can't remember how many channels. 72 different.
Yeah, 70. Yeah, 72. I mean, I guess what I'm talking about is again those being able to move to these different sections of the console to be able to have that have that processing workflow is built
Yeah.
into it. We can emulate it, and we can get close. But
it's interesting that the first DAWs didn't try to do that, because you would think if you were building software, your first thing would be to replicate, because we spend all our time trying to not all of us, but so many people spend their time trying to replicate plugins all the time that look just like and sound just like hardware. It's surprising they didn't do it. It's probably because it was a chicken and the egg situation. They probably weren't able to do something good enough to basically do, audio editing, that they ended up releasing the mixing capabilities before they were really there. I mean, I mixed on D24. That was like the first Pro Tools. Then I had a Mix Plus rig. Then, of course, I bought an HD. So I went through the progression of the mid-late 90s Pro Tools up through, where we are now. And some of those mixes I did on Mix Plus in particular, I still stand behind as being some of my best work. But I could always tell, now I can't, but in those days I could always tell when I went out of the box. One of my favorite things to do with the vocal was always to come out when mixing on Mix Plus and go through an 1176 set to 20:1 and bring it back in. And that was my limiter. I could never get... But then you see in the early 2000s, there wasn't a good 1176. The Bomb Factory 1176, as you all hear me joke about all the time, the only thing in the Bomb Factory 1176 that is 1176-ish is the visuals. It doesn't sound anything like an 1176. It doesn't even sound like the same, like it's even built within the same area code as an 1176. I mean, there's nothing about it that has any characteristic. It just sounds like a generic compressor that has the control of 1176. So it's good for people that know how to use 1176s, but yeah. Dave Rat is great. I know Dave. I would argue Matt Butcher, though. Once you've been to a Gorillaz live show and you've seen like 45 open mics on stage and Damon running around deciding to play ukulele 1 minute when nobody knows he's going to, and Matt just kind of control it. Plus Matt's into the art of it. He does all the dub stuff, all those delays and all that crazy panning and everything. That's all done from front of house live.
Oh, man.
But Dave's great. But he's mixing, and I've heard him do great work. He's mixing the Chili Peppers. It's a whole different sort of world. He's in those sort of, a lot less live microphones, but Dave's incredibly talented. But go to see the Gorillaz live and you'll just freak out the sound. Okay, there's so many great questions.
Did we get to part 2 and part 3 of that question? Says, we abandoning it.
Yeah, well, John says, do you have any favorite tracking rooms? I think all of the great tracking rooms, I don't really have a favorite. Obviously, I wish I could have tracked to the Townhouse. I wish it still existed. I'm really bummed about that. And Olympic, same thing, Olympic. I only worked at Olympic once, and then it was gone. Once. And I worked not when I was in England. When I was in England, we worked at tons of different studios in the UK, but we never worked at we never worked at Olympic. Then I came back I moved to America, and then I went back to England to make a record, and I spent one day at Olympic. And then about 2 years after I was at Olympic, they closed it. Yeah. And they didn't really have a reason to close it. It was still profitable. But it was when what was his name, Guy Hands, when he was running EMI, and he was just trying to think about how to make money. And he was just like closing down businesses and selling off capital and all this kind of BS because he...
Yeah, thank God Ken Townsend got a hold of the studio because he turned it around. He saved that studio.
Yeah, I mean, Guy Hands was just a freaking con man, wasn't he? Because he went in and he borrowed hundreds of millions of dollars to buy this business and then couldn't run it effectively and remortgaged everything and sold off stuff because of his bad choice. Yeah. I'm sure he's a lovely guy. It's nothing personal, but, there was no reason at that time for that stuff to go bankrupt and be sold off.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, mercifully, they got Ken in there, who is like the real deal at so many levels. It's just crazy. And just a super good guy.
Yeah. And what's up with Guy Hands? He looks it's like he's going for the Boris Johnson haircut look.
Hey, I'd go for that haircut if I could grow it. Ain't happening.
Yeah, I'm sure he's a lovely guy. Don't get me wrong, but it did not run that business well. Did not run it well at all. But failing up. Have you ever used any tracking room emulation software? And if so, what are your thoughts about this type of software? I've used the Sunset Sound Studio 3, and Sunset Sound, and I have used the Studio 3 Abbey Road one. Obviously, the Abbey Road one is only for headphones, but the IK Multimedia Sunset Sound is fantastic. You remember we did a drum mix? Well, we did a drum mix and we turned off the room mics and then brought in the room mics from Sunset Sound IK Multimedia, and you're like, it sounds exactly the same.
It's incredible.
It's incredible
Yeah,
because I didn't put any EQ or compression. I just set up a pair of beautiful mics in a room, put it through their beautiful console, and printed it clean. Then you put up the IK Multimedia one, and it sounds exactly the same because I just did the same thing.
Yeah, when I get some kind of dead tracks into mix, I really do like using room emulations on them as I'm kind of prepping the file. Not much, but giving it a little room through the use of we've been talking about waves, like Waves IR, and not full boat. Not full boat. Warren, I've lost my vocabulary for the impulse responses.
IR's good. We knew what you meant. It's okay.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Senior moment, and a little touch of that across the tracks will remarkably bring things to life in a new way. So I think I did an article for your blog where I talk about that. I talk about in pre-mixing. So before you're actually really digging into the mix and you're just evaluating the tracks, that's something that you can try is to use an impulse response across the tracks and put them into a studio together. And you do get that glue and that the gelling of the overall tones just with that little move. The trick with it is to not overuse it, and the other trick with it is to think about. You have to build this mental picture of a room in your mind and where you've got the band set up in that room to play together. So how much is being utilized for any one instrument? Adjusting that. But I've never used too much of it, but in some cases it can bring some dead tracks to life, and I'm a big fan of trying it on tracks I'm not immediately in love with.
Fantastic. Somebody was saying that saying that it was the Abbey Road Studio 3. I was typing it out, but as soon as you finished, was dubious, a dubious plugin, the control room. I sat in Abbey Road Studio 3 control room and did this. I put on the headphones like this with the Waves tracker, and I sat in the seating position and played music and listened to it like this through the speakers, then turned off the speakers, put on the headphones, and pressed play. And I'm just like, this is ridiculous. It sounded exactly like being in the room. Merrick and those guys spent so long emulating that room. They went through so many different things. So I don't know.
I use it on every mix.
Yeah, I don't know.
Every mix.
I know people want to hate on the idea, but if you want to see what your mix sounds like in a room like that, then use it. If you don't, it's okay. That's absolutely okay. But I have never been more blown away. And I know those guys, it's interesting with the Waves guys, because I know, and I love the UAD people as well. They've been so generous. Both those companies have been so generous with us and everybody in the academy. There's no arrogance with those companies. They really do care like UAD is quite special because all of the good Pro Tools people that got fired, they all went to UAD. So like all of the really talented people who Avid let go went over there. They're really, really super smart. And so that's great. So you've got some really smart people over there you can talk to. But what is great about the Waves guys is like Yotam, who's designed a lot of the new plugins. He did the Epic and stuff like that. I will call him at 2 o'clock in the morning without even thinking about it, you know, because it's 2 o'clock in the morning in Tel Aviv where he is. And he has his studio is like a utility room in his family house. So there's behind him, there's like an ironing board where his wife does the ironing. Yes. There's a pair of speakers, and it's just crazy. And yeah, it's interesting because I know that these companies, all of these companies we're talking about are very big and they've been around for a long time, but the actual people that you end up dealing with are just like we should get Yotam on one day. You know what I mean? It's like you're going to be like, oh wow.
To me when people when you hear to me some unfounded criticism about some of these tools, especially the emulations where you've got where you have the testimony of people that have actually used and sat down with it are telling you that this isn't, they're not trying to fool you here. They're not just trying to grab your money. This tool does the job that they told you it was going to do, and it does it in the way that they tell you. I put a lot of stock in that because I think a lot about the professional reputations of these guys, and to me, anytime you're making statements like that about, like Warren, you right now, when you say, I sat in Abbey Road Studio 3 and
scary.
I did this and I couldn't, and I couldn't tell the difference. I put a lot of weight in that because I know you don't take your reputation lightly.
You know what was really, really scary is the first time they did it to me, they did it in the live room. So there's a little live room in there. For some stupid reason in the 80s, I'm sure you know what I'm going to say here. For some stupid reason in the 80s, some genius decided to redesign Studio 3.
Yeah.
So it's no longer the revolver room, no. And it's so it's not that room. So, but I'm in the live room, and they're like, well, do you want to try it out? So they gave me a pair of Sony 7506s, which are like the quote-unquote industry standard in America. In Europe, all the Europeans watching, it's always the Biodynamics, the DT100s, and all that stuff is the industry standard. You go into every studio in Europe, and it's all Biodynamic or Bayer. I grew up saying Bayer Dynamic headphones, but over here it's the Sonys. So he gives me the pair of Sonys, and he plays the emulation. I don't know he's doing this. He plays the emulation of the soffit-mounted huge speakers in that room. And of course, because I've got the head tracking on, I think that somebody has turned on some big speakers in the room. I schnizzle you not. I put on the headphones. I go like this. And I'm just turning my head. I sit down and press play, and I move like this, and I'm just like, what happened? Because I don't know. I've never heard this before. I didn't know about the head tracking, and it completely fooled me. It totally fooled me. So I'm like, okay, I've got to check this out. So that's when I go into the control room and I listen. And I think it all just comes down to what people think of this technologies. You know what I mean? It really depends. I love. I'm really good friends, by the way. If people don't know this, I'm good friends with Vitesy at Snake Oil. At White Sea Audio. I really like him. We had like an hour and a half conversation like a week and a half ago, and we think very, very similarly. And he actually loves some of the same things. His only thing, he comes from a perspective of like how well he's treated. And I relate that, if a company is not going to be very open with him, then he's going to be suspicious of it. And Waves actually have always been really good with him. Like, he just did that review on Epic, and he had a fairly positive response on it. It wasn't the best. He didn't like fall in love with it, but he was pretty positive about it. And he says openly in the beginning of the video that they just put it in his account and say, review it if you want. They don't charge him for it. No money's changed hands. Same thing with us. Waves have never given me $1. They did fly us out for Abbey Road, so thank God for that. But they've never paid me to do any promotion. And you'll find that I don't actually review all of their plugins, because some of it's like, not really up my thing. I wasn't too interested in what's it called? The Ovox. Do 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 boom 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 boom. How many times did you hear that ad on the front of one of the Produce Like a Pro ones? And I was like, it's kind of cool, and I like the idea. You know what I mean? But I was like, it's not really my thing. I might do it, but nobody inside of the Academy asked me about it. Not a single member asked me about it. And I do reviews based on what people want. Like the Eve speakers, the Static, was it Pete wrote to me about it? I got about 5 or 6 Academy requests on those speakers. So I was like, that's why I'm going to review them. If there's no groundswell on it, I don't really want to talk about it, because then I'm a sellout, aren't I? I'm just like that guy, like going, yeah, bro. It's got to actually be something that people. Tom says he's sick of that ad. Boom, doom, 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 boo doo 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 doo.
That was it. That was the line.
Yeah. It's either that, or I'm not going to say who it is. It's either that, or it's somebody else that does YouTube that we all know, talking about like how he's going to help you make money, even though he's never actually commercially released a single piece of music in his life. It's like, it's so tough, isn't it? It's like, here I am. I'm going to help you build your business up as a professional producer, engineer, and mixer, which I've never done myself, but I'm going to tell you how to do it. Sign up for my course.
That's great. Now there's snake oil.
So, Bobby, do you like the Ovox? Is that where you're? Do you like it? I gotta wait. David says that thinks the. Yeah, I'm not sure, David, if it makes that much difference from a mixing perspective to have the hub tracking. Anyway, the Abbey Road tape head is that new? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that is. Anyway, let's get back to the questions, because I'm off there. So we've done. I think we did all of John's stuff here. Let's see what else we've got coming up. We have a couple more. Stereo drums. David Johnson says, it is my understanding that the only stereo drums recording on a Beatles album is The End on Abbey Road, where we can hear Ringo's kit spread across the soundstage. All the other Beatles drums recording were mixed down to a single track. Is that correct? Well, that wouldn't be all that on Come Together, obviously, the stereo drums, because you hear the toms going left and right. But I suppose he's right. There's not many. Is that correct?
Even with Come Together, you'd have to. It's a mono drum. Now they pan that part.
Oh, they pan it.
Yeah,
as it's playing.
Yeah, it's still mono.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, but Glenn Johns started experimenting with recording the drums across 2 tracks during Let It Be, and what he would do would be to record the majority of the drum kit onto 1 track, and then he would use another track, say Lennon's guitar track, and he would send the kick drum to that track. And he did that in a handful of instances during the Let It Be period. You're not gonna be able to pull that out of most of the mixes, but that was an approach that was done. It's not stereo, but it is allocating more than one track to the drums. With some of the early work on Abbey Road, there are a couple of tracks that once again where the drums were initially sent to 2 tracks of audio, but they ended up being summed down to 1 to save real estate. the only full stereo recording of the drums is for the drum solo on the end. Yeah, beyond that, completely right. Even though they would be mic'd with well, in the Abbey Road era, they were giving up to 7 channels of the console, of the 20-channel console, to the drums, and to dial in the drum sound. They were still only being printed to a single channel of audio.
Right. That's amazing. I didn't know that. So I always assumed that was Stereo Tom's recording, but I'd be interested with that. So was that? But that was played live. That wasn't an overdub.
No, that was played live.
So
yeah.
I wonder what that sounds like in isolation. You must hear like everything else bleeding and moving with it.
It's an excellent question. This is the Beatles in isolation. For anyone who gets a hold of the Rock Band stems or that sort of thing, which aren't true. Remember, these are stems. Those aren't tracks. They're combinations.
That's another thing. I've been very careful. It's a good topic of discussion. I'm very careful with like some of these. When we do the song breakdowns, I know that there's a popular YouTube channel which does all those song breakdowns, but bear in mind those are always Guitar Hero stems, and they've usually got an assistant engineer taking a 24 track and making a bounce. So when you hear people go, oh yeah, you can hear the sample or you can hear the reverb they use. No, you can't. No. The Foo Fighters one in particular I did was as a result of a discussion where they were talking about the drum samples that were used in it, and the engineer Brad and also Chris the mixer wrote to me and said, please can we do a video on it, because everything that's being talked about on these songs is wrong because we didn't use any samples. That's just the Guitar Hero stuff. So just be sort of aware that you can watch those videos talking about song breakdowns and stuff like that, but bear in mind those are Guitar Hero stems. They're taking some of the original multi-tracks, but then they're not putting Shelley Yakos in the chair and saying, Shelley, recall the mix exactly. They're just doing that, So you've got to be careful with that stuff. There's interesting stuff to hear in those, but be thoughtful, or keep it in context of what you're actually learning from them, learning about the process, because those stems were put together in the combinations that they were put together in order for a game to be created, not for us to learn about the music. However, with the Beatles. So that being said, with the Beatles Rock Band stems that are out there, you'll hear combinations of things. Some of them are fairly true to how they tracked it, but you'll hear combinations of things that the Beatles in isolation are not a great band. It's so true that they are the sum of their parts. They're greater than the sum of their parts. I mean, I have multi-tracks of Stevie Wonder, Superstition. I mean, so I've heard. I mean, allegedly I have multi-tracks.
I allegedly have heard those as well.
Yeah, and if you solo something, it's just not how you should listen to music, because if you solo something, you're like, it's pushing and pulling, pushing and pulling. You put it all together, it's the best sounding track you've ever heard in your entire life. And I think that's another danger with hearing things in isolation. We can't judge performance based in isolation. We can only judge performance when it's combined, because what sounds good early or late with another instrument doesn't sound good in isolation. So, yeah.
Yeah, and this is the role of the producer in the studio, is to say that's the take for whatever combination of reasons. And often, the answer to that is that the take for Martin wasn't the tightest performance. It was the one that really felt right. An example I've brought up before, but I'll remind people of, is Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. There's a guitar part by Harrison played on the Leslie that was tracked with McCartney's bass, and it's the line that's dum bum 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 ba dum ba dum ba dum. This line, and you listen to that in isolation, Harrison misses the note half the time in that. On his Leslie part, misses it in conjunction with McCartney playing it, but together, the tone of that, because it's being played in unison, works and is right, and was good enough for Martin to say, we've got it, move on. most of us nowadays would have made them play it over again, but they didn't. And unless you're here in isolation, which you never do in the real world, um, you wouldn't know those things. So there's lots of messy audio out there that when brought together is very magical, and the Beatles are no exception to that. A number of messy performances, but when you bring it all in and listen to it together, it's like, oh, the Beatles, they sound so great.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. We got any more questions on this? Oh yeah, we got one more from Pete. Pete says, "What kind of keyboard was John playing with his elbows at Shea Stadium during I'm Down?" Any idea?
Yeah, that was a Vox Continental 300.
I was going to say, was it a Continental?
Yeah, it's a Vox Continental 300, and I believe he broke it playing that on the tour. Yeah, he went a little loopy during that particular performance at Shea Stadium, and yeah, Vox Continental 2-tier keyboard, cool, very 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 identifiable sound. Used a lot in 60s pop.
Amazing, absolutely amazing. Okay, let's do a couple more questions. We've been on for a couple of hours, or we'll be soon. I'm going to Vox Continental if you didn't break it. Original.
For those of you who are musical or virtual instrument fans, the Arturia Vox is really good. Really good.
Anthony asked this question right at the beginning. Sorry, Anthony, I should have asked. What do you think of the mono mixes versus the stereo mixes? Paul has expressed that he prefers to listen to the mono mixes.
I'm in agreement with that. The mono mixes, especially, well, all the way through to the White Album, the Beatles, the White Album. The mono mixes are the mixes that the Beatles had their hands on too. They were the very earliest stuff. Of course, they were just simply musicians going in making the music, and the mixes were in the hands of the engineers. But they were creating for the UK market, which was mono. So that was the focus, was getting a really great mono mix, because that was their initial market, their primary market was the UK. And when they did start participating in the mixes around 65, 66, they started attending the mixes. They only attended the mono sessions. They would leave the stereo sessions to the engineers just to get done. And you can see in the tape logs that where you might have remix mono 12 of a song, meaning it's the 12th time they've tried to mix that song, when you get to the stereo versions of the same song, you might have RS1 is the release version, or RS2 is the release version, really remix stereo 2, meaning that rather than spend all of that time that they did to get the mono and just right, they, in essence, kind of threw off the stereo mixes to get them done. And so the mono mixes have a character to them that you won't find in the stereo ones, and there's an attention to detail there that isn't in the stereo ones up through the White Album. The White Album was all mixed pretty much and finished all in a 24-hour period, where they were simultaneously doing the stereo and mono mixes. And then out beyond the White Album, pretty much everything was stereo. So
yeah, it seems to be universal here. I'm reading everybody's comments, and everybody loves the monos for the same reason. It's interesting because growing up, I had some albums in mono and some in stereo. Because I got into the Beatles when I was very little. I mean, they obviously had broken up before that, and some of the albums that I would get, because I didn't have any money, were, used. And when you're buying 60s used albums in the 70s and early 80s, most of them were mono. And I think the first Sgt. Pepper I ever had was mono. I feel like it was mono.
Well, you got a good one.
Yeah, I unfortunately don't have. I don't have my whole record collection from when I was a kid, unfortunately. But that's a whole other discussion. I'm reading questions here. I can only go back so far. We've got a couple more minutes. Any burning desires?
Is that a question?
No. I'm asking everybody out there. Is there any burning desires? David Johnson says he likes all the mono mixes except for Tomorrow Never Knows, which for him, he says, for some reason it's missing some of the favorite parts from the mix in mono. Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, there's something beautiful about that mix that's insane. Aaron says the first vinyl that they got was Sgt. Pepper. Great way to start. What do you think of the Giles Martin mixes? It's... What do I personally think of them? I think they're great mixes. It's just like anything. I'm always on the fence. It's like... No, I'm not on the fence. I'll just be blunt. I'll lap up anything Beatles, anything Queen, anything Pink Floyd, anything that I love artist-wise. I'm always going to buy it. I'm always going to want to listen to it, And if Giles is going to remix some stuff and I'm going to hear things that I never heard before, I'm going to lap it up and love it. I love the Love album. I loved going to see the show. Does it mean that I'm still not going to have a special place? I mean, going back to Let It Be, for instance, of course, the original Let It Be album is always going to be one of my favorite albums ever. But I enjoyed Naked. I enjoyed it. And I don't have a negative opinion on it. I don't have a negative opinion of them trying new ideas. Isn't that what they always were? A band that was continually developing and trying out stuff. I'm sure if John was alive and George was alive and they were making music, they'd be doing all these kinds of things and more. So I have no problem with variations, remixes or whatever. Doesn't take away from my love. And that's the thing, is like I don't feel like it's a competition. When people are going, oh, Naked is so much better, I'm like, do you have to have that opinion? Can't you just love them both? I don't really understand. And also I feel like, we were told wrong. We were told wrong that Let It Be was a completely live album, totally live, combination of done in Twickenham and on the rooftop, and that's what we heard. And then Jerry goes and ruins it for us and tells us exactly that it wasn't, that it was actually overdubbed and tracked, and the stuff that you think is live is not live. And then they stripped in, thank you on behalf of the group and ourselves, is actually from the live version, but the version you hear is the studio. So, but, I don't really care. It's nice. I love it all. I don't know.
No,
that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, our ears have been tricked forever, and they'll continue to be. And but when it comes to, as Warren was saying, like the Giles Martin work, it's a modern take on it. For completists like myself, it's great to be able to hear the things that he exposes through his mix. Now, I prefer the classic mixes, on a personal level, because they do things dynamically with the music that I prefer over the way that Giles handled it. But those are just preferences and tastes and things. And I'll ears that are younger than mine probably really love the evenness and the openness of what Giles did. And if this is a gateway for people to get into the music of the Beatles, and because he hasn't remixed everything, but if it's a way to introduce people to the music, then bless him for it. It's great. And again, he's bringing out aspects of the music that they couldn't because of the technology, and he can. So it's going to sound different. It's going to be modern because he's a modern guy, and that's all okay.
Yeah, I thought most of his decisions were really, really, really tasteful. In fact, let's rephrase that. All of his decisions were really, really tasteful, and it just comes down to is it individual people's tastes? You can never ever, get. Everybody hears the same thing differently. We all hear things differently. So, to say that this was right or this was wrong, it's just it was just different. It seems like we all agree. It's great music, it's great music. And everybody's asking what the next book's going to be, Jerry. Are we allowed to say?
well, there's one book I don't know if we're allowed to say, but yeah, I've got, there's on the Beatle front for me. There's a couple more projects in the works. I'm not ready to talk about them yet, but over the course of the next couple years, there are going to be another some other Beatle focused work that I'm going to do.
And there's some other great books coming out, and that's the end of that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's just say there's some really great books coming out.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
That you're all going to absolutely love. Well, Jerry, thank you ever so much for a couple of hours of your life here, my friend.
Oh, you bet, Warren. My pleasure.
Thanks for the great audio. It sounds really clear, doesn't it, Eric? Sounds so good. And thank you, Jens, for pointing it out. I'm sorry, Eric decided to delete that comment for some reason.
Yes, I hope to become a much more consistent audio buddy for everyone on the channel. I know I've dropped my ball.
It's quite all right. All right, this is absolutely mine. Tom, there's some good ideas. All right. Thank you, Jerry. You rock. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks for all the great questions. And we'll see you again very, very so long. So long, farewell. I'll see you Friday morning for Feedback Friday Live. See you soon. So long, farewell. Thanks, Jerry.